This is Robert Capuccio. Welcome to the Self-Help Antidote, a weekly dose of reason, perspective, and insight, where we challenge conventional thinking and explore authentic strategies and insights around personal transformation. Our commitment to you is to bring you some of the world's leading experts in the domains of fitness, wellness, coaching, and behavior change, separating fact from fallacy. Tiffanee and I'm Bobby, and what is going on with this? There's something flashing on my screen asking me to do something. I don't know. It's one of those updates that pop up at the worst time ever. You know what I'm talking about, right? Where you're about to get on a serious Zoom meeting. I was like, no, you've got to enter this and restart. It's like, I don't want to restart. You keep hitting that little X button. It keeps popping up and you're fighting with your computer. It's like, look, if I don't get on this, like, I'm going to be sacked. So basically, like, this can wait.
I press I press the buttons before I read the message. I'm that impatient, or I'll get halfway through reading, or I'll just make an assumption and click yes to get rid of something. Then I'm like, oh, probably should have read that. That's probably annoying. Do you know what else is annoying?
What?
You would probably already know this, but even though I've had them for quite a few years, my eyeballs have just learned that I am now 40 and they are not tolerating me not actually wearing the glasses I've had prescribed for years. How the hell do you keep glasses clean? This is really annoying. Like, how do you keep glasses clean?
Oh, it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. What a mess. Here's what I do. Okay. So this is, of course, riveting for our listeners right now who are also struggling keeping their eyeglasses clean. Or maybe you don't wear eyeglasses, but you wear sunglasses. And this is also an issue. I imagine it's the same thing. And you just carry a microfiber cloth around with you. Mm. But you just got to make it this thing where you just do it because my glasses are dirty again. You got to pull them out. I just walk around, whip out the microfiber, try to look cool doing it. Just clean the glasses, throw them back on my face. I probably don't look cool. I probably look quite spazzy. I don't even know if that's a word. It is a word that's been used to describe me in the past. Thanks, Mom. So yeah. Anyway, keeping your glasses clean. Always have a microfiber cloth with you.
Okay, well, this is another thing I have to carry. Super annoying.
Oh, how much stuff do you carry? Like all the stuff that women carry, not to be sexist about this.
I know, but do I look like a handbag girl? I do have a handbag, but like...
You can keep an entire... like a woman's handbag to a man is almost an accessorized equivalent to a clown car. Like how much stuff can actually be in there? Like you could pull out engines, you could pull out entire makeup kits, you could pull out literal outfits, you could pull out your mate from like when you were 8 years old, stuff them in your purse, don't realize they're in there. They're living in their own private sector of like a pocket universe from Marvel. It's like you've got all this stuff, but it's the microfiber cloth that sends you over the edge. This I have no tolerance for.
Well, do you know what's really funny? Earlier this year, I was meeting Harps and he goes, look, is that whose handbag? Is that your handbag? Because I was carrying a handbag. I have a really nice handbag. It's really cool. And he was like, yeah, I think he obviously, not the girliest girl in the world. Wouldn't expect me to be getting around, definitely not getting around with Louis Vuittons, that's for sure. But, he was just shocked. He's like, did you steal that from someone just then? Are you holding it for somebody?
No, you know what? That's not fair. I can imagine you with a lovely handbag. Sleeves? Not a fucking chance. Handbag? Absolutely.
I know, but at what age am I going to have to pack it in and start wearing? So I've never liked or worn T-shirts, and I'm someone who gets, I had my Roll with the Punches muscle tops printed and I wear them every single day. Almost, I would say 95% of my life I'm wearing a Roll with the Punches muscle top or a Roll with the Punches hoodie. So I'm pretty cash and it takes a lot to get me out of those clothes. And when I am out of them, I've got very, very few sleeved T-shirts. Like I've got long sleeve tops, but T-shirts with sleeves. Not a fan. But, you know, maybe surely there's got to be a day where it becomes, I hate to say it, age appropriate to wear.
It's your style. Listen, I used to know a woman. That's the start of many great stories. But anyway, I used to know a woman who never wore sleeves, but she had all phases of dress. So she would have all this athletic kit, sleeveless T-shirts. Yeah. She would wear a business suit. I don't know if she had them tailored, sleeves taken off, or she just bought them like that somewhere, but she had no sleeves. I mean, she had a rocking pair of arms, Anne-Marie. So this was when I first met her. We did not get on at all. Oh, she had zero time and patience for me.
It's because you're jealous of her arms?
I was kind of a little bit, but my arms back then were rocking. I had a rocking pair of arms back then. We probably had like arm rivalry going on, but I wound up spending time with her on 9/11. It was interesting. So I lived at Ground Zero. I think I've mentioned that in the podcast before. So when the towers fell down, they fell down literally on top of my apartment. And so I was at the office. So I woke up that morning and I was going to go to Washington, D.C., which, you know, plane crashed into the Pentagon. So obviously that trip was canceled. And I stopped off at the office in Midtown Manhattan. And as I'm getting my stuff together, you know, getting last minutes, you know, looking at my tickets, looking at my presentation, I was going to do like a regional event. And you know, somebody came into like the office I was in at the time, was like, hey, you know, go to Ed's office. Something weird's going on TV. Plane hit the towers. And, you know, my first thought, like everybody's first thought was, wow, oh my God, what a freak accident that is. And then, you know, we're looking at it and it's a commercial airliner. It's like, okay, that's even weirder. Like, how does that? And then as we're watching it, secondly, it's like, oh, okay. This is something very different. And so at first there was all misinformation. You know, nobody has their story straight. You know, this is like unprecedented in New York. Nobody knows what to make out of it. And they said, well, you know, there were planes a plane, you know, I don't think they knew about the plane that crashed in a field, but plane hit the Pentagon, a couple of planes hit the towers. And they said that there was, you know, probably 3 or 4 more planes that might be hijacked, and they were coming back towards Manhattan. So that was the story. It was probably like telephone. Somebody heard something and misconstrued that. But people in the office were like, okay, yeah, planes are coming back towards Manhattan. We were in Midtown. That would be a likely target. So everybody was evacuated out of all the buildings. So you see all these people like flooding into, I mean, Midtown Manhattan's pretty full on with people anyway, but it was jam packed with people, and they shoved us uptown into Central Park. And I wound up being with Anne-Marie for a couple of hours trying to figure out what's going on. And just fast forwarding a few months, I wound up absolutely adoring this woman. Sometimes you just don't understand people, because you haven't taken the time to get to know them. But like there's no time for that shit. You know, it's like the message that I got during 9/11. This is something that I was reminded of. One of my former co-authors, I think he was reminded of this to a far deeper and tragic level than I was this week. But one of the things that, you know, growing up, because growing up, you would have people that, you know, you're friends with, and then they're not there anymore. You know, they either get murdered or they're in a car accident.
None of mine got murdered.
I grew up in a different environment. So car accidents, you know, people were killed. Then you would get, you know, those tragically young kids that would, you know, get really sick with something or another, and then they're gone. So you start to realize like you don't have a lot of time. But then I think you get older and you get into a groove, and like you're trying to make things happen, and you kind of forget that. 9/11 was a reminder. As much time as you think you have, you might not. Like time is precious, and the shit that you're worrying about might not be really relevant, because if you had, you know, a week to live or 6 months to live. And this is kind of how I lived my life. I've talked about this for better or worse, because there has been benefits and there has been consequences. But prior to 9/11, because I came out of a very unpredictable environment, but then I got into my career. I was traveling, I was speaking, and I thought, like, I'm gonna look to the future. Everything was about the future. And then you realize, wait a minute, hold on. You got to start being a little bit more present, being future oriented.
Yeah.
That's okay. There's value there, but you can't over index completely on the future and be completely disconnected from the present. I think there's a little bit of neuroticism that might ensue, but you're going to miss things, and you're going to miss things that are so critical that when you miss them, it will adversely affect the relevance of the things that you're struggling to create in the future. So it's almost like you can't create the future you want without being connected to what's happening in the present that's building that bridge day by day. And I got very sick during 9/11. I was living underneath that dust cloud, and I went from just being single-minded in my focus, which, to be fair, 99% of my focus was around work. And I think the other 1% was on food. Lunch. And then I couldn't work nearly as many hours. I started drinking as soon as 5, 6 o'clock rolled around, especially if I had a meeting. We would go out. I would order a glass of wine, maybe a few, because if I didn't do that, it felt like, I remember this analogy because I remember saying it and it stuck. It felt like in order for me to produce a thought, somebody was cutting that thought out of my brain with a piece of jagged, rusty steel. That's how bad my headaches were. So I would have a drink or a few just to be able to get through the meeting. So that started happening. And the aftermath of that, moving to the UK, meeting someone named Helen, I gotta say her surname, but she had an incredibly positive impact on me. And what she was trying to teach me was slow down and be present where you are. So I think the obsessive compulsiveness of my personality with Tourette's, thinking I'm really ill, and Helen trying to teach me, listen, the only moment you can control and exist in, really, you can time travel in your head, but be here now where you are. I started living my life as if I only had 6 months. Not like as if today was the last day of my life, because if today was the last day of my life, would I really brush my teeth or, like shower? Like, would I really do that? You kind of need to do those things. So, like, if I only had 6 months, what would I do? And I think the more important question that I asked myself, or the more impactful, I don't know if it's more important, but it definitely was impactful. What would I absolutely not do if I only had 6 months to live?
Yeah.
And that's the way I lived my life. And, some people found it liberating. Some people found it extremely annoying, but you never know how much time you have. So my co-author, that's all I'll say. I won't say his name just to respect him. He lost his wife about a week ago. She lost a 13-year battle with cancer. And that when I heard, because he's 8 hours ahead of me. So when I woke up, that was like the first thing I heard. It hit me really hard because she had been cancer free, and like, she was just courageous. She was one of these rare people. You say this about a lot of people, but this individual was extremely kind, effortlessly sweet. It was just who she is. And cheeky, really cheeky, which was a beautiful combination of characteristics in a human being. And, one of the things that he was telling me in conversations with him over the past week is, when you're going through that, you always have that hanging over you. Like me, when I was sick all those years ago, you always have this, okay, how long have I got? Because there were other people that were very sick from the same causes that are no longer with us, and some people weren't living in that area. They were working like on that site, which is much worse, but it's not good living in that. And, someone with cancer, they were always, the prospect of death was always in between the two of them. It was always on their mind or in the back of their mind as they're trying to build this life together. I think, wow, you just never know, because it could be a random event. It could be an illness.
Or, just as bad, it could be just a really long life to reflect back on having wasted or not had perspective. Bronnie Ware.
I want to talk about that a little bit, because I think when we confront the possibility of going too soon, it kind of informs us of, well, what really is the definition of a life wasted if we don't? If we stick around long enough to grow bitter with regret, we all have a neighbor like that. You see the consequences of it. What is a wasted life?
As you've been talking, it reminds me of, and I talked about it a bit recently, that book that I read, Die with Zero, which was a book on how we earn and spend our money, how we work for a living, and how we, how we generally don't live, and how we maybe should, new perspectives on how we should live each phase of our life, how we should create memories, but how we get into the system of work and we accumulate and we save and we invest and we hold on to things, and then most people die with money in the bank, which equates to free work that they've done for years. And for a lot of people, that's not work that lights them up. Or leaving money to loved ones. But, it even talks about leaving money to your kids. Give it to them when they're like figuring this all out, and just like give it to them when you're around.
I understand. I understand that, because having security and having freedom to make choices that you wouldn't have if you didn't have the resources to exercise those liberties.
Yeah.
That's quite painful. And that leads to suffering that brings you down to more base level needs. That could add a lot of stress to your life. And I understand them wanting to leave something behind and provide for their family. I think that's something that should be an imperative. In the right situation, providing for the people you love is not just a responsibility. It's a source of deep joy. There's a desire to do that. I think there's different ideas about how that shows up. What does it mean to really be there and provide what? Are you doing this because it's aligned with your value? Like someone who values security and peace of mind is going to behave very differently than someone who, and I think everybody values these things. I don't know anybody who's like, well, security, not for me. Peace of mind. Nah, maybe later. I prefer deep anxiety, frustration, and unpredictability, but we value them at different levels.
Some people are so liberated by freedom and not bound by having debt. I had friends when I was younger that would get a credit card approved to go overseas on a holiday for however period of time with no contingency plan. And I used to think with my level of, risk and needs for security around my own kind of financial well-being, I was like, I couldn't borrow money to go on a holiday and then come back and have to pay it back afterwards. Like,
it's the way they see the world. It's like, okay, this experience is worth more to me than being in debt. So for me, I grew up, my stepfather, he was constantly out of work and he would spend money he just did not have. And somebody else always had to pay it. And he put me in a really bad financial situation when I was 18 years old. Mm-hmm. So the second I was old enough to get a line of credit, I got screwed. And that's a long story. But other than that, aside from fraud, because of that, I've maintained zero debt my entire life. I mean, zero. I've never owed $1 to anyone outside of fraudulent situations that I needed to fix. If I was anything that, and this is not necessarily a good thing, but anytime I would buy anything, even if it was quote unquote a major purchase, I had to make sure that I had a separate account and I had the money for it in its entirety already put away. Mm-hmm. That's how much I was negatively affected and developed the value around finance. You can't really say financial freedom because that's not financial freedom, but being debt free as a condition of how I was going to live my life. And when you encounter people, you get into relationships with people that do not have that value, it's frustrating for both people. Mm. But I can understand why people would do that. It's a matter of what are your values. I think if you're going to talk about regret, you got to be really clear. And I know we always go back to this. What are your not what everybody on social media demands of you, not what your parents expect of you, not what your peers think is. What are your deeply held values, the things that keep pulling you back to it rather than you driving yourself toward them? That's indicative of what you truly value. I think like John DeMartini, we've both had him on the show. You had him on twice. I'm supposed to have him on again. Actually, I got to reach out to John. But when he talks about in his book, The Values Factor, like being guided by your values and what happens when you wage an inner war against yourself and you try to take a path that's not aligned with what you truly value, that is a recipe for misery. You're never going to win that fight. You're going to lose that battle based on pure emotional, spiritual, physical fatigue. And people try to convince you because I think, when people are living a life that's not completely aligned with their values, it's aligned with what they think they should do, that sometimes there's a little bit of resentment there. Sometimes there's outright anger and bitterness, and looking at anybody doing something that you're not doing is quite confronting and angers. I've always wondered that about people. We were talking about that earlier, where, I think there are certain societal agreements that we all should have with one another. So I asked a guest on my podcast probably a year ago, and I didn't push the issue. I said, what is it as a society we owe each other? And, she came back with a very popular response. We owe each other nothing, not a thing. Bullshit. I cannot oppress you. I cannot infringe on your dignity. I cannot take something from you, either tangible or spiritual or sentimental. I have no right to do that. We have to owe that to one another if we're going to be in a society where people thrive. I don't owe you a living. I don't need to put your kids through uni. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about there is basic kindness and respect we owe one another. And I don't care if that's a popular opinion or not. Try living in a society without it, because we're progressively moving there. Anybody happy about this? Anybody really happy about the trends that people are complaining about consistently in society? There you have it. So I think there are things that we do fundamentally owe each other, But when people get really angry about anybody living a life that doesn't affect them any way, shape, or form, if they weren't told or didn't find out about it, they wouldn't notice it because that is how much it doesn't touch them. Yet they get deeply moved.
Yeah.
I got a question. Are you living by your values? What are you so pissed off about?
Well, but how do... Let's talk about values. So people can be living... Where's the line between values and fears or values and needs? But like, be living to your values. Obviously, if someone so much values security that they won't take a holiday, or they really prioritize the working and the earning, and then they get frustrated by other people who seem frivolous, who are off, doing what I described, going on, or, borrowing money to take a holiday or doing the fun stuff. And then you feel hard done by that. Oh, that's not fair, because you'd love to do that, but you're actually living by these other values of security and blah, 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 blah. Like, talk to me about that, Bobby.
Well, I think that's a really good point. How do you know when you're confusing a fear, the fear of losing a basic human need, for a value? Like, what are we talking about? A need is something you require for your survival and your peace of mind, to where you can pursue higher level endeavors, things that truly contribute to others, bring you joy. I think contribution to others is an essential prerequisite to fulfillment. But that's just, I'll just say that's my opinion. But a value is something that intrinsically gives you meaning and life. And I think the way that you discern between the two is when you're aligned, you feel a sense of life. You feel a sense of congruency. You feel a sense of creativity. It's almost like, when you go out with somebody and they're funny, they're charming, they're attractive, but as the relationship starts to progress, there's almost this feeling of being unsettled. There's this apprehension. And then somebody else you meet that seems to have a lot of attributes that are similar or maybe different, but just as beautiful, but there doesn't seem to be that inner conflict. It's almost like when you know. And it's almost like when you think about, I know personally, I've been in relationships where I loved someone deeply. And I was very infatuated with them. I was attracted to them. There was a lot of things in place. When I thought about how that relationship progressed into the future, it caused me a lot of anxiety. Where there would be other times where I would be in love with someone and a best friend with that individual, and they had a lot of attributes. But when I thought about a future, it's almost like it was compelling, not fear-inducing. I think when you're living a life of quiet desperation, as Thoreau put it, there's this tension. There's this tension you feel under the surface that something inside of you is screaming because it's not being expressed. It tries to whisper, then it speaks to you, but you're still not listening. It's not heard. And eventually it screams. When you're living in alignment with your values, you don't have that intrinsic friction. There's a fluidity to it. And I think that's the difference.
what causes us to live out of alignment of our values? And what triggers this question is I remember doing, way before I'd even had a podcast and had John on the podcast, was really the reason that I reached out to him. I remembered doing his values determination process. It was where you go in and you asks you all these questions and you answer questions, and then it spits out your values. It shows you what you where your values are, what you value most. And it's funny because, I mean, obviously, like all questionnaires, like all self-assessments, you put it just regurgitates what you put in back to you, but it gives you clarity. You go, oh, I remember being really surprised that things that I wondered, do I really value that, or do I just say I value that because whatever, because I think I should, or because it sounds good, or whatever. And then when I did this determination test, I looked at it and went, oh, wow, yeah, that's a high rank. That's come up in all of these places, which is interesting. But so our values are, according to him and that questionnaire, where you spend your time, money, and attention. If you look around you, what do you spend your money on? What do you spend your time on? What do you spend your attention on? It's right in front of you. So what's causing us to live out of alignment of our values?
Well, there's a lot of things, and you have to take into consideration that you're asking that question to a bloke who was stuck on what his lunch order was going to be earlier this afternoon. So take my wisdom of all things and unraveling all the mysteries of life with a grain of salt. But I think it's when we develop a fear that our values are in conflict with some of our basic human needs, like our values may cost us our survival. It may cost us safety or security. It might put us in a situation that terrifies us. It might cost us acceptance. Well, if I have these values over here, these people, usually close within the family, or they're like family, maybe they won't love me. Maybe they won't accept me. They won't approve of me. They'll withhold love from me, or maybe how other people see me. Or maybe I'm confusing values. One of the many things I love about John's work is he does a really good job discerning values from social constructs, social environments, and social agreements, where it's like, oh, I was taught you need to value family. Family is not a value. It is an environment you build around you so that you can express your values through your family. I think one of the best examples of this is with my friend Richard. So we all had a senior leadership retreat, and we were all working. Me and Richard were at the same time working for a major organization in the fitness industry. And one of the things that the consultants, they brought in these consultants to guide us through this, corporate leadership journey. And one of the things that they talked about was integrity, and you keep your word. And tomorrow we're starting 8:00. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean you start drifting into the room at about 8. I mean, the fact that we even had to go over this with people who were in the C-suite and executives is kind of interesting in and of itself. But it's like, okay, we start at 8. What does that mean? 5 minutes to 8, every single person should be in their seat, and not in your seat, checking text messages, sending emails, in your seat, ready to go. So 5 minutes to 8. I had a funny story, but maybe we'll get to it later around getting there on time. But I was in my seat, and 8:00 comes, and there was one person not in their seat, Richard. And it's like 5 minutes after 8, 10 minutes after 8. And now it's almost uncomfortable because everyone's trying to pay attention, but there was such a point made for the last 30 minutes of the day yesterday or the day before. Everyone is noticing, okay, Richard's not here. About 20 minutes after the hour, Richard rocks up. And these consultants, they were interesting. They were not people that avoided confrontation. Let's put it that way. And as Richard's going to his seat, they're like, whoa, hold up. Why did you violate your promise to the group yesterday? You made a promise, you broke it. Why? And, Richard, just, stereotypical Aussie that he is, he was just brutally honest about the situation, didn't try to sugarcoat it, said, right, yeah, here's what happened. This morning, I was on my way to work really early, but my son, Hastings, he was out really early as well, and he was on his bike. And was it Hastings? Was it? Anyway, I think it was Hastings. We'll go with that. And he was riding his bike. He was trying to ride his bike for the first time with no training wheels. And this is a pivotal moment in my kid's life. And I thought about it, so 30 years from now, looking back, am I going to be like, I'm really glad I made that meeting on time? Mm-hmm. Or it's my kid discovering something new for the first time. Looking back 30 years from now, am I going to go, oh God, wow, Hastings, remember that time that, we were out in front of the house and we were living in California and you rode your bike he's like, hands down, it was my kid. Because Richard values when people try. He values discovery and adventure, exploration, creativity, values all these things. And he so much wants to be an advocate for and create an environment around his kids where they try stuff and discover stuff. So for him, this was something that he was never going to get back. So he decided, I'm going to be late for this meeting. So do you know what the consultant's response was?
What?
Thank you for your honesty. And he just spent 5 minutes on values, talked about what is truly important. He understood, let him go. He's like, yep, you violated your commitment. You need to make this right. You're going to have to figure out how to make this up to the room because it is a violation. You have broken your promise, but yeah, wow. He's like, I would have done the same exact thing if I were you. And because if he was like, oh, well, the motorway got on, like that would have not flown well. Or yeah, I got, caught up with something, would have been disastrous. But that consultant's like, yep, that's what That's what happens when you are connected to source. So your values, your vision for your life, your integrity, your declarations of this is who I am for people and who they are for me. You don't keep promises. You are your promise. You don't, when you are really the best version of yourself, you are not acting in alignment with your values. You are the expression of your values. You are the impact of those values on other people in your state of being. Divorced from anything you're doing, it's who you're being that is the embodiment of that. You are source. And that's interesting language, but that is exactly the way that works. Like when you look at language, there's descriptive and declarative. And I think this is very important. And that's why when you know what you value and you're like, okay, I'm going to live this no matter what, everything about you and everything about being around you changes. Because I could say like right now, Amy was texting me, my wife, and I was in the middle of doing this. So I did check the text message just to make sure she's okay. She's okay. Okay. I'm going to stay focused on this. But like, this is a phone that I use to communicate. I could, if you didn't know what a phone was, right? Let's just say I went back in time, like a phone in your hand, and I described the phone. Is my description of this phone an actual phone? And the answer is no, right? Just like when you go to a restaurant and you're looking at the menu and the menu tells you all about what you're ordering and they try to describe it in a way that's quite enticing. Like, oh, I just want to order this. Is the menu, no matter how descriptive it gets, is the menu the meal? No, the menu is not the food. The food is the food. The menu is about the meal. So I could talk to you about the chair I'm sitting in. My description of a chair is not a chair. You can't sit down in my description of a chair. You need an actual chair. As a matter of fact, the chair isn't even a chair until you say it's a chair. We could have called it anything, right? We could have shaken things up, and we first deciding these things. We could have called a chair, a lamp, and that would have changed society, wouldn't it? Right? I'd be sitting down in a lamp, and like when it's dark in the room, I turn on a chair. You don't know. We could have done that because these are things that we made up, right? Yes. It's not like God descended from heaven and said, "This is a chair," but a promise. You don't make a promise. You are there is no difference between the declaration of a promise and the actual promise itself. Do you understand what I mean by that? Like, I promise you, that is not a description of a promise. That is the literal embodiment of a promise. Like, a chair is a chair, independent of whether or not you are describing it. It's this thing. My description does not make it equal to the thing. I cannot sit in the description of a chair. If that was the case, all I would need is the IKEA catalog, and I wouldn't need to order any furniture, would I? But a promise, there is no difference between the declaration of the I promise you and the actual promise itself. The promise is the declaration. You don't describe a promise. Like, Tiffanee, like one of these, like, here's what I could one day promise you. And here's what it would look like if no, Tiffanee, I promise. That's declarative language. And when you are living in the embodiment of your values, you become that thing. If I value learning, I become that conduit of learning. You know, it's something that even if I'm not in the everything is that for me. Like, this conversation is that for me. You know, this interaction, you know, across the street, you know, at 7-Eleven, that's learning for me. I become that thing, and I become that for other people because I'm in that state.
Isn't it funny though? Because if we ask most people about their top values, I feel like quite a high percentage would reel off honesty. But when it comes to times like that, we're not honest because we give an answer that we think would be more appropriate. Like, if we're late for something, instead of saying, yep, I made the choice because X, Y, Z, and then you've come in with integrity and honesty, and everyone values honesty. Instead, we're like, shit, I'm late. This, that, and we've actually broken trust, really. But isn't that interesting?
And you could say, well, I'm being dishonest, or no, you're acting in alignment with what you really value. There's something there that you value, or there's something that you don't want to confront. Like, a fear is to your point, overriding a value. I personally do not think honesty is a value. Not saying it's not important to people. I'm not saying people value lying, cheating. Well, some people do, but I don't think that's the case. I think honesty falls into the category of a social contract. I will not, and it's not like I will always tell you the absolute truth, like what's going on that would be a society filled with people who have Tourette's, you know, like we have a place like that. It's called Australia. So, but it's this social contract. I will not be deceitful to you in a way that harms you. If you ask me, do I look fat in this outfit? I'm going to probably say, no, you look lovely, regardless, because there's another value. There's sensitivity. There's concern for how you feel as a person. There's me knowing that no matter what I say, it's not going to override your impression. You know, you might be looking for reassurance or whatever. So we do those things to each other, you know, constantly. I mean, you can value vulnerability. You know, I will express what is in my mind and in my heart, and I will be open with you and open to you. That's different. I think that is a strong value. But honesty, yeah, well, I would hope you're not going to steal my car. When you don't get clear on that, though, I think everything is and intrinsic. Another thing that I think is the litmus test, we talked about it. Does the things you're adhering to cause conflict and anger? When you are living in congruency, when you are living in alignment, your natural state is not resentment. It isn't anger. It isn't reactivity. Like if you're constantly posting about the behaviors and I know someone who did something bad and these people did, and that is your default, something's happening there. And I know it's more than not living in alignment with your values. You might be really injured. You might be really bitter about something that's deeply painful, and understandably, but I guarantee you, or my strong guess would be, you're not someone who lives in alignment with their values. You might be living in alignment with someone else's values. You might be demanding other people live in alignment with those same values, but you're not truly living in alignment with yours. And that's really scary because like we don't have that much time. Like even if we live to a ripe old, like think about this. Think about the distance between one decade. Think about the distance between 20 and 30. Think about the distance between 30 and 40. And as we start to get older, we start to get more and more concerns around responsibilities, or a lot of us tend to. So time seems to perceptually accelerate. Remember when you were kids, right? When you were a kid, and you were really present. Remember how long a single summer lasted?
But also it's a large fraction of a child's life. For a 10-year-old,
yes.
1 year is 10% of my life. That's like 4 years for me now.
Yes, that is absolutely true. But time itself, because you're not thinking that, right?
Nah.
You're not thinking that when you're a kid. Well, relatively speaking, given the duration of this year versus how many years I've been alive, a summer lasts forever.
Yeah.
Like a day out at the park.
Oh, we're so present. We're not looking at the time.
Exactly.
We're waiting for someone to grab us by the ear roll and go, hey, time's up.
You're completely where you are, where as you start to get older, time seems to accelerate.
Yeah.
Goes faster and faster. So if you're 40 years old, think about that. Even if you live to 80, that's coming quicker than you think.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we get so caught up in what we're supposed to be doing or who we're supposed to be that we lose sight of, wow, if I really had 30 days to live. Somebody wrote a message to me yesterday about our podcast, Bronnie Ware's book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, and said that helped them through a really hard time. If time were limited, like if you were in hospice, heaven forbid, what would you want to spend your time doing? If given the energy, let's say you had enough energy to do certain things, what would you want to do? Who would you want to see? Like, I think that I'm not discounting accomplishments and contributions, but I think a lot of the things that we get caught up with and they matter so much wind up not mattering at all when we're confronted with our mortality. And then other things that we've been putting off, not addressing, not nurturing, seem to be everything.
And to use a word you're often obsessed with, paradoxically, it's like
Am I often obsessed with that?
You're so obsessed with that. You and paradox. But I think about how many, when I think back over life, so I've just turned 40 and I think about all the iterations of life and so many different versions of Tiff in the middle of life, and they all feel like a lifetime ago. So much happened in each one, and so much was achieved, and so much change, and so much difference, and so much evolution, and so much learning. But also at the same time, 5 minutes ago, we were just hearing about a bloody new virus, and now it's over 3 years down the track. 5 minutes ago, I decided I'd do some PTing. And now I've had all of these things happen. And then 5 minutes ago, I thought I'd bought a microphone and thought I'd have a crack at this. And now I've done 600 episodes, you know. Both of those things are true. So I think about the next 40 years and I'm like, God, my mind boggles at the things that will be achieved. So on one hand, it's going so fast. Let's get a crack on. Let's keep perspective on being present and, you know, watching out for, am I focused on the right things? Am I getting the best out of the now? Am I getting pulled into any bullshit of my own? The answer is fucking yes for a lot of that for me. But also, how exciting. So much is like happening.
Yeah, I think you're not alone. That's the thing. Whatever we're going through, no matter how great or how tragic, whoever we're being, no matter how magnanimous or resentful or impulsive, you're not alone. We've all, you know, everybody goes through that spectrum. It's just a matter of people like, oh, well, decide who you're going to be. There is deciding that I'm going to take a certain course of action, and then there is getting really clear on the essence of what matters to me and aligning with that. You know, it's almost like I can't think of a really good analogy right now, but it's almost like trying to go the same distance against gravity, pushing your car up a hill because, you know, you've broke down on the motorway and that's where the petrol station is, rather than just recreationally pushing your car up. Who does that? Like maybe Craig Harper does that for fun. Versus, you know, seeing another petrol station and jumping in your car, you know, as it goes downhill. So you're going with a powerful force rather than going against one. That might be the worst analogy ever. But bottom line is,
bottom line is everybody get cracking. Time is running out.
Appreciate the time you have. Like make that phone call, you know, like have that experience. You know, and then I think probably talking to myself as much as everybody else, you know, it's like, well, what exactly are you waiting for? You know, whatever you're afraid of is going to pass. You know, the people whose opinions you're consumed by, they will pass as well. Everything is impermanent.
We get so consumed by the world we're in, and I've mentioned this once before, probably yonks ago though. I remember walking through the city once and looking up at one of the high-rise buildings, and there was a little window with a sign in it. It was some little boxing gym or something, and I looked at it and I just remember thinking, like, there was not a familiar face in the CBD, and it was, you know, there was this gym and it was a box, and I was like, in my world, I'm so, you know, especially I'm in the world of boxing and networking. So there's all these little worlds of mine that collide where you're familiar with all the people. People know you because there's this small community. You're a name in it, you know, whether that's business networking or the sport that I've chosen or the gyms that I've gone to. And it's like, God, you know, everybody knows everything. Everybody knows who you are and what you do. And I remember walking through the city and going, there's like, with the thousands of people I'm passing in the street, not one of them knows who I am, what I do. I could move to the city, you know, like 10 or 20 Ks away from where I live, 10 Ks from where I live. I could move to a new apartment there, choose different activities and be a completely different person be surrounded by different people. It's like, no, but we think about what people think and who knows us, and we get all consumed by the world we're in and what people think, and you can change everything. And I just remember that thought tangent was really like, oh yeah, the world is way bigger than my head.
Which wonder is pretty what big. Would happen. This is, you mean like you're all about yourself, or like you're just talking about like the literal diameter of your head is large?
No, I don't have a huge diameter of a head. I have a small head.
Yeah, I mean your head. Well, it looks perfectly
Thank you.
Proportional
Thank you.
to the rest of you. It's not like Beetlejuice, but you're not like a bobblehead either.
What were you going to say?
I forgot. I was going to say something about something. There was a thought in my head, not related to hat size. I'm not really sure what it was. It was just there. Oh, I wonder what would happen if we lived our lives like an experiment, where we just had this working hypothesis and we just wanted to test it. And it's not so much where it ends up, but having that in mind, obviously, but seeing what happens. I'm just so curious about what happens. What can I learn without being irresponsible and reckless in your own life and with others?
Yeah.
Not like you're sitting in a coffee shop. I wonder what happens if I flip these tables over. What would be the response? Don't do that.
Well, I recently had a lady on. She left the film and TV industry for a start, just to milk camels in the outback. And then she caught 5 camels, trained those. That's
a unique choice.
Yeah, trained those 5 camels and then spent 13 months by herself with those camels walking across Australia. And, and there was and I said to her at the end of this, I said, there was no tipping point for you. What I love is that you've got this industry that's all glitz and glam and, people are like, why would you leave? You've broke into the film and TV industry and why would you leave? And I said, there was no tipping point. You weren't burnt out. You didn't have a nervous breakdown. You didn't have a mental health crisis. You just decided to do something different. And and who even thinks? It's when people do something so out of the box like that you go, if you're stressed about any aspect of the life that you're living, I'm talking to myself now and anyone that wants to feel like I'm talking to them, but if you're so stressed about any aspect of that life you're living, you're actually choosing it, and you're choosing it because you were conditioned to it. Yep. And you're choosing it because the ecosystem of people and the way they operate has revolved around that mindset and that lifestyle. But that's the ecosystem that you're in, and you're choosing it. And you could just go out and milk camels and train them, or do something completely weird. Walk across Australia with 5 bloody camels and a tent and maybe some baked beans and a jar of Nutella. She ate Nutella out of it with a spoon. I was really happy with that.
Ooh,
it was almost enough to make me pack up and grab a camel and do it myself.
Well, I'll start small. I'll try that Nutella experiment. I'll let you know how it goes.
I've done it a lot.
I think, wrapping up, because I know we're at time. One of the cool things about doing that is not only that you have this outrageous life experience that wasn't part of your plan, but I think it breaks you out of your preconditioned patterns.
Yes.
Long enough to step back, and because you can go, well, what do I really want? And your environment and your anxiety and the demands of it and all these voices in your head that aren't even yours are answering that question for you. But I think when you completely disrupt those patterns and go do something vastly different, so you're not anchored to any of your day-to-day conditioning, you're far more likely to get a much clearer answer, whether or not you're around a camel.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you, Tiffanee.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit us at theselfhelpantidote.com to share your feedback, insights, and recommendations on what topics you'd like us to explore in the future.